Welcome to another Wednesday yachting luncheon at the St. Francis Yacht Club. It's beautiful to be here looking out these incredible windows right on the water. Let's see a little bit about future speakers. You want to stop by on May 23rd. We'll have Bill Pearson, head of 3DL for North Sails, here to talk all about what's going on with the newest sail technology in the world. Come on by on May 16th. John Lawrence Bush will be here to talk all about how steam engines began the Industrial Revolution and what kind of courage it took to take the first steam engines across the Atlantic. Ron Holland will be here on May the 9th to talk all about the incredible 200-foot yachts he's been building. He's been active for 40 years now, building amazing yachts. May 2nd, we'll have Steve Tishia here. He's chairman of the selection committee for the America's Cup Hall of Fame. He'll have lots to say about how they select people and what's coming down the pike for the Hall of Fame. Bob McCullough will be here for his new book, The Capture of U-505, in April, Legion of Heroes. This is an American true story he's written a book about actually capturing a submarine in World War II. And one of the world's foremost authorities on Winslow Homer will be here on March the 14th. Philip Eliasov will be out here from Connecticut. He'll give a whole talk on the American spirit of the 19th century and how Winslow Homer painted Manifest Destiny to the imagination of the rest of the world for us. Dave Holscher will be here in early March to talk about swimming to and from the Farallones from San Francisco. Everybody's done that, I'm sure. We'll have Andrew Stephen Dews will be here to speak. He's a portrait artist and painter of some note. He has painted incredible pieces, and we'll have an exhibit of his work in the Wardroom on February 28th. You may have seen his work. It's going literally at auction for several $100,000 these days, and he's done some great work for local yachts. Kim Livingston will be here on the 21st of February to talk all about why we dynamited the junior program at St. Francis and have inspired an entire new perspective of junior programs, which he hopes will go nationwide. And then Tom Eamon will be here to speak about the America's Cup, what's next and new for the oldest game in sport. Tom, as you know, is a veteran of 12 America's Cup campaigns. He'll be here on February 14th. And on February 7th, Bob Heller, former governor of the Federal Reserve Board, will be here to talk all about what's new for the Federal Reserve. So we have quite a great lineup of speakers in the next several months. A little bit about our speaker today. Born in San Francisco, the first notable boating experience he had was at age 4. His parents bought a boat called 5-Star Yacht that they would make their livelihood and home, and kept it in Sausalito. So our speaker today grew up on that boat. Remembers playing hide and seek as a 7 and 8-year-old, discovering that under the steering column was the perfect place. No one could find him under the steering column, and he could win the hide and seek battle there. Next memorable memory was at age 12, sailing the Boston Whaler by himself out past the gate to take pictures of the sunrise coming over the East Bay Hills, because at that time he'd go out in the dark and he could be there as the first early light would come across. At age 17, he passed the Coast Guard test for a six-pack, the 25-ton license, and also raced in his first Master Mariner race on the famous Free-to-Be, a historic yacht in San Francisco Bay. And he'll begin in August sailing in the participating, being a student in the Cal Maritime Academy up in Vallejo. He represents a speaker 1/3 the age of our most recent speaker, and I'd say 3 times as ambitious. He's a bright young man who will speak on a new person subject, drones. All of us who sailed know little about drones. We need to know more because they're basically becoming the sort of record of date of what's happening in the ocean, especially in the biggest one design classes. So please join me in welcoming our speaker today, Anthony Scopazzi. Anthony.
Scopazzi. Scopazzi. Hello, everyone. As he said, I am going to be talking all about drones today. all about their laws and regulations that you have to follow regarding drones and how to actually fly them and the maintenance involved regarding drones. Not about the drones that kill you, but I'm going to talk about the drones that you and I can actually go out and buy. Forget that. He already said a little bit about me, but I work as a videographer and photographer doing freelance work ever since high school, really, with my good friend Gary Ferber over there, who's done wedding photography for 30 years. I also work as a chef for All Seasons Catering and as a chef/first mate on 5 Stars Yacht, the boat I've grown up on with my dad. And I'm very excited to be going to Cal Maritime this August. So that'll be very, very exciting. But, you know, you don't need to know about me. You want to know about drones today. And there's one clear distinction to make regarding drones and their drone laws is, are you flying as a hobbyist or are you making money from it? Are you a commercial pilot? No matter what you're doing, there are laws you have to follow. There's universal laws, but the one true universal rule is you need to register the drone with the FAA. If it's lighter than half a pound, you don't have to register it, but basically every drone you will buy will be more than half a pound. So you have to register with the FAA, and it's really easy. You do it online through their website portal, and it costs $5, and it took me about 5 minutes to do. And they give you this little number, or symbols that you have to stick on your drone. That's so, in the case of an accident or your drone ends up in someone's backyard, they can call the police. The police will be able to track you down and where you live and your information from that number. That's why they require you to have it. That's why they require everyone to have it, even if you're a hobbyist. So if you're a hobbyist or commercial, you have 5 rules to follow. There's many more than that. This is the first 5. Number 1 is you have to fly a drone under 55 pounds. From what I've come up with researching about why this rule is in effect, it's mostly due to Amazon and other delivery services like that of trying to limit their thing where they can't stick basically a helicopter in the sky to automate you deliver packages. It sounds arbitrary, but I think that's why. Number 2 is you have to fly within visual line of sight of the drone at all times. You have to be able to look up and see your drone at all times. You might not be physically looking at your drone. Basically, every drone has the Wi-Fi where you can see what the drone's seeing on your phone screen. So you might be standing here looking at your drone flying, and you might not be physically seeing your drone and looking at it while you fly, but you have to be able to look up and see the drone. That's one of the rules. Number 3 is don't fly near other aircrafts or over people. This is the one I see people break most often. They fly over people. Is really common to break because it's really hard not to. If you're flying at the beach, it's hard not to fly over a miscellaneous person, but technically that's breaking the rules. So you're not allowed to fly near other aircraft. That's pretty obvious and probably one you hear about in the news. Rule number 4 is you can't fly in controlled airspace. That's in your airports where you'd most likely be able to find planes at low altitude. And I'll get into the FAA permission bit a little bit later. And the 5th rule is you can only fly during daylight. Comes into line of sight, you have to be able to see your drone. So you can only fly during daylight at or below 400 feet. That's 400 feet from where you take the drone off from where you are. So if I'm here at the yacht club, I can go up 400 feet. If I'm on top of Mount Tam, I can go up 400 feet, right? So it's 400 feet from where you take the drone off. It's not 400 feet from what's directly really beneath the drone. But there is a bit of leeway, like let's say I go fly up a hill. It might be over 400 feet from where I started, but there's a lot of gray area in drone laws where it's hard to tell exactly because no one seeing your drone is going to be able to look at it and go, yes, that is exactly 400 feet. So, it's kind of difficult. The drones do tell you how high it is. So if someone looks at your phone and it says 1,000 feet, then they can prove that, you were higher. So that's something to think about. But those are the 5 drone laws that regard what you can and cannot do with your drone. But you might notice there's asterisks on the end of 2 through 5. And that is because licensed operators can apply for a Part 107 waiver with the FAA to break those rules. If you want to fly over a crowd at a music festival, and obviously you're getting paid to fly commercially, you have to have the waiver from the FAA to fly over people and break the rules. But how do you become a licensed operator and be able to apply for waivers like this? You get a remote pilot certificate from the FAA and you pass their knowledge test. The problem with the knowledge test that I've had personally is that they don't just pertain to drones. They also pertain to planes and all that stuff. Like on the right, you'll see that it's just a big chart of a bunch of information that, as a drone pilot, I'm not going to really use in my everyday life, but I still need to be able to answer questions about it and be able to answer it. This is just to give you an example of some of the test questions. I'm only going to read the last one, so don't freak out that there's a test. It's the, the last one is a stall occurs when the smooth airflow over the unmanned airplane's wing is disrupted and the lift degenerates rapidly. This is caused when the wing exceeds the maximum speed, exceeds the maximum allowable operational weight, and exceeds the critical angle of attack. Now, do you see this having a plane wing? It's got propellers, but it doesn't have a wing like they're talking about. They look similar, but they're different because they operate differently in how they fly. So this would be C, but it doesn't quite pertain to drones. So you see why it's a little difficult to take it. A lot of the test questions would also be on alcohol use and how much you're allowed to have when you're flying, which is obviously none. But there's some more common sense. They don't just all apply to drones, though. You have to know a little bit about RC planes and the flying of a plane. So there's 5 more rules of where you aren't allowed to fly the drone. So now you know the rules of what kind of drone you can fly and when you can fly it, but where are you allowed to fly drones? This is an overview of Northern California. I wish it was on the bigger screen. So number 1 is you can't fly within 5 miles of an airport. This image, if you can see it, is 5-mile yellow circles around our local airports, SFO on the left and Oakland on the higher one, and then the airport in Hayward. You aren't allowed to fly within 5 miles of it. To be allowed to do it, you have to get the air traffic control authorization and the FAA license to go through all of that. Number 2 is temporary restrictions due to air shows. Obviously, if there's a temporary air show for a week, they're not going to allow you to fly within a certain area there. And dignitaries. If the president's in town, they're probably going to have temporary fly zones around his speech area or wherever he is, stuff like that. I couldn't find an image example. This is the permanent where you are permanently not allowed to fly around Washington, D.C. It's just a permanent no-fly zone that's always there. Number 3 is you can't fly in any national or state parks, which is kind of annoying, but they had to make this a rule because idiots would fly drones at wildlife and get them stuck in national landmarks. So they ended up having to make this a rule. The local example here is Angel Island, Alcatraz, Marin Headlands, and the Presidio, as you can see. As someone was mentioning earlier, people like flying drones all the time here, but you should mention to them when you see them that it's technically against the rules. You see this one broken a lot, which is kind of sad that people don't realize what the rules are considering all the drone signs. But it's a big. This is the one I see also, along with overcrowds, that really bug me. Just people not paying attention to the rules. Number 4 would be NOAA protected areas, different than national state parks, but they usually are near it. They say that this is because you can't fly under 1,000 feet due to the bird populations. So the Farallon Islands is an example of where you can't fly drones, not only because of state park, but also because NOAA says you can't fly due to all the birds living there. Almost like state parks and national parks, but they are different. And obviously, you can't fly in restricted airspace, like Travis Air Force Base up in Fairfield. They have their protected airspace for a reason, and you aren't allowed to fly in it. They're probably more likely to catch you if you are flying where you're not supposed to, as they have radar and actual people, paying attention. So this is one that you really don't want to break. But you might be asking, what's to stop me from flying in national parks? What's to stop me from doing all those things, breaking any of those 5 rules? And there actually is stuff built into the drone that will stop you from flying. After a DJI Phantom, one actually really similar to this, crashed into the White House lawn, they made that permanent no-fly zone, the company made the permanent no-fly zone where the drone just won't take off if you're too close to the White House. They do that by your phone when you fly, and the drone connects to satellites for positioning settings and all that. And so they know where you are, and they know that if you're too close to an airport or in a national park or stuff like that, it just won't take off. So there's the moral obligation to follow the rules, but then there's also the physical limitations they built into the drones. The funny thing about that, though, is I bought that drone when they first started coming out about 4 years ago, and because I haven't updated the firmware on the drone, the software settings, it doesn't have that limitation. Where this is a new drone I got about a year ago, and this has that limitations. So technically speaking, I can take that off by the White House or by the national park, and it'll fly just fine, while this, because it's new, won't. So old drones don't quite have that built in because if you don't update your software, they can't affect your drone that way. And you can also build your own drone and just fly it wherever you want. So there's a lot that laws still have to do to catch up with all this. Before I move on from the law portion, there's two more thoughts I want to send out there, which is emergencies, specifically our local wildfires that happened because drones actually disrupted the wildfire fighting operations. You might be flying your drone going, there's no planes in the air, it must be safe, right? But there's no drones, there's no planes in the air because of the drone. If the helicopter pilots spot the drone in the air, they'll have to suspend operations till they can see that it's no longer there, which is, one, you can be fined up to $20,000 for it, which is, bad, but also you could cause someone to lose their house and all that stuff if you're flying where you're not supposed to be. So it's really important to just know when it's safe and when it's, allowable to fly, which is what a lot of people just don't think about when they fly drones. And the second thing is, regarding commercial people, is flight insurance, but specifically liability insurance. If I crash into a drone, if I crash into a boat I'm filming, do I have liability insurance for that, right? The companies on the left couldn't offer it. They just flat out don't offer liability insurance for drones. They probably have done the cost and it's too expensive. But the company on the right called Verifly is an app that will actually give you liability insurance within a quarter mile at an hourly rate of 10 to 20 bucks per hour. It's only within that quarter mile and you have to do it, before every flight. But it's actually pretty neat that they'll offer you that. And they even offer the ability for people, if you're licensed and have the Part 107 waiver, to prove to them that so you can then fly near airports and get insurance near airports. So it's a pretty new company that actually allows for some innovation in the drone area. So we all don't like laws, so I'm going to move on to actual drones and all the different types that you can have. There's a lot of different types of drones. There's small drones, like on the left here. There's even smaller than that. For racing, they can do flips and fly incredibly fast. And then there's medium ones, like the ones I have, that are more consumer, a little bit more filmmaker-oriented, with a little better cameras on it. And then there's even larger ones that movies make, that hold 20-pound cameras and do all sorts of ridiculous stuff. But they work, and the reason they're so handy is they have cameras on them that are stabilized, which is pretty nice. Because you can see if it'll actually work for me, where it'll stay level while the drone moves. And it's having a problem here. So, go back to level. Probably because I picked it up and turned it on. But you get the idea, especially in this image, where if the drone's sideways, the camera will stay level. Which I should say the technology for that's been around for a while. Yeah, it's still trying to figure itself out. Drones are a little finicky. Yeah. Well, I turned it off. Let's turn it back on. There's a lot of troubleshooting and just a lot of thought process involved with drones, not just about the laws, but also about everything. There you go. Now you can see that it's actually holding level. Like no matter what the drone does, it'll stay level, which is, let's just turn it off, which is incredibly useful because you can fly sideways rather quickly and the drone has to tilt obviously when you're flying because that's how it works, but the camera will stay level, which is how drones like this and even bigger ones work to be able to get amazing shots that you see on all sorts of things. And they even auto adjust for wind. As I mentioned, they connect to the satellite, so it knows where it is on the Earth's surface. And if there's a 10-mile-an-hour wind blowing that way, it'll auto-adjust and stay in that position. That's why when you take a drone off like this, I don't know about tiny ones, but at least bigger drones like this that connect to satellites, you can take it off and it'll hover in one place and adjust for the wind and other stuff that's going on. So it's incredibly useful to fly with. So you don't have to automatically adjust with controls on your hands. If you build it yourself, you have to do that unless you build that into it, which is difficult. The reason they're amazing, though, is they're incredibly cheaper than using a helicopter. Sounds pretty obvious, right? That's why they've come to take off in so many years, because they're tiny. I can go and buy it and fly it and not have to have a helicopter and all that. And I'm sure with enough practice, not a lot of practice, any of you guys could actually go out and fly them. They're really easy to fly. I mean, they might seem really intimidating, but once you get it off the ground and play with it a little bit, you can, basically anyone I've seen can figure out how to fly the thing. But before you actually take off your drone, there's still a couple more thoughts to think about. There's a lot of thought process involved with drones, and one is batteries. They all run on batteries. At least there are some that run on gas, but I've never seen any in person, and I've only seen them online. So basically every drone you'll see run on batteries. And the problem with batteries, as you might notice with your phones, is over time they degrade and they slowly get worse and they don't last as long. Now, each battery lasts about 20 minutes of flight time. So it's important to keep track of the age of the battery and how many times you used it. With your phone, it's not a big deal. You just recharge it whenever. If it's flying, that's a big deal to keep track of. And you do that. It's really easy. I do little markings. Basically, everyone I've seen just says, how many times have I used this battery? How many times have I put it in the drone, flown, and discharged the battery? And this one has 5, 10, 15, 25 even. The reason you keep track of that is you don't want to be flying and expect 20 minutes of flight time with your drone, and you're getting about 10, 15. That'll affect you, especially if you're over water. Yet you better keep track of how old the batteries are and how many times you've used your batteries. Just because you don't want to be flying and be, oh yeah, I have 20 minutes, I'm fine, I can get back to where I am, I'm over the ocean or wherever you are, and then suddenly freak out because you can't get the drone back to you safely because the battery is going to die, which is really scary. I'll tell you from personal experience. You don't want to have your drone be over the water and have a problem. So this is really obvious. Just to think about what you're planning to film before you take off. You don't want to take off and then think about it. You want to go, I want to get this shot of my dog running down the thing with my wife, running down the beach with my wife. Think about that before you actually take off. Make sure she's not feeding the dog or whatever. Get the drone up there when you're ready to shoot and when you're ready to film. You have 20 minutes, so make the most out of your batteries. It's just important that you communicate that plan with everyone involved, especially with what I'm doing. If I'm filming yachts on the bay, I'm on the chase boat and I have to film the other boat. It takes a bit to get into position. They don't just suddenly magically get to where you want them. You have to wait. And so you don't want to be waiting with the drone in the sky, especially over water. You've finally taken your drone off, right? So you've thought about all these rules I've mentioned. You've thought about the no-fly zone. And you can finally go fly the drone. But there's a couple problems that you'll experience in the air once you're actually flying. There's a few things that you'll experience. And one is these drones only work to about 1,000 feet away from me. This one is, they say, 958 feet. So it won't even go 1,000 according to the manufacturer, which is important to know, especially as I'm that tiny boat in the distance. If you look, there's the close boat. I'm on that far boat. So I shouldn't go too much farther, right? And I doubt you could even see me on the right-hand side photo there. I'm on top of that hill. I'm far away from the drone, right? It's important to know that and how far away. They tell you how far away they are. The drone will tell you how far away it is, but it's important to keep track of that because you'll lose video signal and suddenly not be able to see what the drone is seeing. And then you're like, where is the drone, right? You can hear it. You've been looking at your phone screen, but suddenly you no longer have the video that the drone's seeing. Which brings me into the second problem, and the solution is, I went to there, let's go back, is being able to actually see the drone in the sky. You can imagine, this is pretty small. If it's on a white backdrop of clouds 1,000 feet away, try to see that, right? If it's 1,000 feet away, you might not be able to hear it over what's around you. So you might not be able to pinpoint it with your hearing. That's where always having a spotter comes in. Always having someone near you who has eyes on the drones at all times. When I'm flying the drone, I look like this. I'm looking down at my phone screen, getting the shot that my client or I want. I'm looking down, getting information from this and aligning my shot correctly. I'm not looking at the drone. And I can see where the drone is, but if there's a problem or there's something that happens behind the drone, I can't see it. And that's where it's important to have the spotter next to you or your friend or just someone who has eyes on the drones at all times. And I'm not meaning eyes like I'm looking at my phone, I'm texting friends, and then, oh, I'm also looking at the drone, right? You want them looking at the drone at all times, especially when it's far, far away from you, because if they lose sight of it and you lose sight of it, if it's over the water and you're like, I don't know where the drone is, That's really scary, right? A couple drones, especially like if you buy a brand new one, will have a button on your phone that says return to home, and it'll automatically fly back to where you are, which will help with that. But that's on the like new drones. This one doesn't have it. The white one, my bigger one, my newer one does have it, which mitigates that. But when I'm flying, I can't see what's behind the drone. I can't really see what's to either side. So if there's a tree or a sailboat comes up that I don't see, or there's just anything behind me, that's where that person's job is to tell whoever is flying and really in charge of it that there might be a problem involved, right? And the third problem is rain, wind, inclement weather. If it's raining, you're not going to fly your drone. They do fly in the rain. They have worked in the rain before, but it kind of ruins your drone. So you try not to fly in the rain. Yeah. And wind, obviously, too windy, you can't fly the drone. I really don't like winds about over 10 miles an hour or gusts over 10 miles an hour because it affects your shot, for one. So it'll affect your ability to get a nice, smooth shot, but it's also just unsafe for the drone and just for anything around the drone, as it's harder to control it. If a wind gust comes and blows it sideways into something, it's your fault for flying your drone in the wind. I really don't like the wind themselves. Yes, the wind's nice for sailing, so it's hard to use a smaller drone like this when you're filming a sailing race. Because I've been asked to film a sailing race with it, and it's like you're sailing in the wind. I can't really fly in 20-mile-an-hour winds. This drone, the white one, will go about 30 miles an hour, which is pretty fast. It goes about 30 miles an hour. The big one goes 15 or so. So you can also imagine thinking about batteries and thinking about all that. If I'm flying into a 15-mile-an-hour headwind and it's 1,000 feet away, it's using more battery to get back. It's going to take longer to get back, which brings into you might run out of battery and you might lose the drone or it might crash. So the wind and the fog and the rain and everything really affects your ability to use your drone, because I might plan an event 2 months out and it's too windy that day. So you got to say, okay, we're not filming both today. I can't fly. And it's difficult with wind and rain. It's just the judgment call when you wake up that day. Are we going to work today? Am I going to go fly my drone today? Or is it just not able to fly? So, right, why not attach floats to your drone? Sounds pretty obvious, right? You're on the water. Why not make it so if you have to land on water, it doesn't sink? And they actually make products for it. There's only one product I've been able to find for this type of drone, the DJI, where it's like a little mosquito on the water where it'll float on the water for you, which is really handy if you're flying over water a lot. Like for me, I fly over water a fair amount because everyone wants footage on the bay. So you end up needing things like this. Or you can make your own with pool noodles, but I'm not going to trust myself to protect my drone by flying it with pool noodles on it. I use it just for filmmaking purposes, but there are a lot of other uses drones are used for nowadays. They're really common to use in all sorts of things. As you probably saw during the Super Bowl, this last year, 2017, they had drones behind her. They weren't live. They filmed them a week ahead of time because it was deemed too unsafe to do it live during the performance, but they were flying, and Intel really did fly drones in performances like that. They've actually set the record for 500 drones controlled by a single person. They do all sorts of air shows like at Disney World, or you can go to an air show of drones at night. So it's pretty amazing that they're just tiny little drones that'll go up in light, and they're all controlled by one person. Other uses, which I'm sure you've seen a lot of, is shots for TVs, movies, films, commercials, everything like that. Like on the left is a shot from Skyfall, which is the motorcycle race scene. They've shot shots for that on the drone. And on the right-hand side is just a simple pool scene from, the Wall Street one. I'm going to forget. But it's the Wolf on Wall Street. There you go. And just a simple shot, but that's really easy to get with a drone. If you're going to get a helicopter, that's a lot more expensive, a lot more difficult than just having a drone go get that shot for you. Other one you might have seen in the news quite recently, actually, this January, is a drone went out and saved 2 swimmers in Australia. It flew out to them, dropped LifeSaving inflatable, and they got safely to shore because of the drone getting out there in a minute or two compared to someone actually swimming out there. So they've been looking up using drones for everything like this. And even in Colorado, a drone saved, or found, I should say, some lost hikers instead of the foot crew that went out to find them. So the drone could tell everyone on foot where to actually go to save the hikers because the drone found them first. So they've been starting to use in everything like this. and even fitted with infrared cameras to find people at night that are lost, which is pretty handy. They're really big in the real estate market, because you can get amazing shots of houses and the views with the houses for relatively inexpensive. And since drones have become more popular, it's kind of expected that you get shots like this when you're with houses. So that's a really big part of the drones. And with Hurricane Harvey, I'm sure you saw a lot of footage shot on drones. A lot of news sources use drones all the time to get shots for them, and documentary people and other, journalists use shots from drones. And they even use drones to assess damage, like insurance operators use it to assess the damage from Hurricane Harvey or down power lines. That way they can fly the drone out there, assess all the damage. One person can do it, and you don't have to spend all this time to hike out there and inspect the damage. They even use them in agriculture to spray pesticides, like the one in the image on the right is showing. They'll use them to pre-program flight, fly out there, spray the pesticides, and just land safely back. No one's flying the drone. It knows where to fly. The image on the left shows it's going to follow those yellow lines because it knows where to fly via GPS. It'll do that automated, do that whole field for the farmer. He doesn't have to, go out and walk around. He can just watch the drone do his fields, fertilizer, pesticides, whatever. So that's really handy for modern farming. They even use it for surveying, with attaching cameras, obviously. They'll pre-program the flight. The survey company will come out and program it to fly in that grid pattern over wherever it is, and they'll be able to 3D map that area from the drone images. Because the drone just takes off, does its thing, you don't have to control it, and it comes back. It's all automated, which is pretty neat, but also a little scary. Now, drones are amazing tools, but there are other solutions to drones. There are other things you can do, which one is being you can use a tall tripod. They go about 30 feet in the air, and you don't have to worry about battery life. You don't have to worry about being a licensed operator. You don't have to worry about anything to do with drones because you're just sticking a camera up there. It's really easy to do. If you're in a crowd, that could be a solution. It's just way easier than having to use your drone, especially if you want a time lapse, because these only last about 20 minutes for you. Next solution would be a jib. I'm sure you've seen these at live music performances, and car commercials use them, and movies and everything, really, to get moving shots from cars. But they're safely used over a crowd. You don't have to apply for the waiver with the FAA. You don't have to worry about battery life. It's really safe to use these over crowds, and use them all the time in music shows. So if I had the option at an event to use one of these instead of a drone, they'll get the same shot, and it'll be much safer. So why use the drone? Use one of these. And then the third option would be Steadicams. I'm sure you've seen these. They can be tiny, like the ones on the left, or they can be even bigger and hold cameras like the one on the right. If I have the option of using my drone or using the one, I have the one on the right. If using the one on the right, I'll use the one on the right down the wedding aisle. I'm not going to fly my drone down a wedding aisle. It's loud, it's interruptive. I'm going to probably have to fly over people, which would be breaking the rules unless I get the waiver. So why not just use, a Steadicam and get basically the same shot, much safer, much easier for everyone involved. It doesn't disrupt the wedding, and there you go. Yeah, you can imagine. People have used drones to deliver their wedding rings before. So they have been used at drones, but if they're not a part of the wedding, I would say don't use them for weddings because they're kind of loud and disruptive. So after all this, we've gone over all the rules you have to follow and how to fly them and a bunch of different drone types. What if you want to start flying drones? What if you're like, this sounds interesting, and where do I go out and get them? Where should I start? I would really recommend starting with small drones, like under $100. You see them at Costco, Walmart, everything like that. You'll see these, they come in all sorts of different brands that are usually knockoffs from China. But you can use one of those just to get the feeling for what it's like to fly. You don't want to go out and buy one of these in case you crash it because they're not cheap. And so why would you want to go out and break something like this when you can break something that's $100? And it gives you the idea of what it's like to fly the drone into practice. Because ideally, I would say practice a little bit before you end up getting bigger drones. But they make these really cool small drones that even fold up and are perfect for traveling. I'm going to talk about the one on the right because I don't like the one on the left. The one on the right is way cheaper. It all folds up, and it's controlled via your phone, so you don't have to have a controller. So let's say you go on a trip, you can just control it via your smartphone, fly it all around, and there you go. It's really, really fun. And then that is the end of my presentation. I would like to say that afterwards, if you guys want to come up and actually look at my drones and actually get a feel for them, like see them in person, because you might see them flying. But if you want to come actually up here, see them, pick them up and look at them, come back, stay afterwards and come up and look at my drones.
Okay, we'll sit over here. We're going to ask a few questions. Yeah. The heck, Anthony? Feet here.
Make sure to turn it on.
Yeah, good idea.
Hey, is it working now? Yes, it is.
Working. Tell me when you're all set, Thomas. You're rolling? Curtains the way you like them? Anthony, how many days or hours of flying time do you think you have so far in your drone life?
I bought my first drone, the DJI, the white one, when they first started coming out, about sophomore year of high school, which would be 4 or 5 years ago. And I guess I could count the numbers on my batteries if you wanted to be extra specific, but as a wild guess, I don't even know. It's hard to count. 100 hours, maybe more than that. Like, I'd have to count my batteries because they don't last too long, and so you don't want to practice too long.
How many sessions?
Quite a bit.
100
Honestly,
sessions? 30 sessions?
50. if I had to
50
guess.
sessions.
Yeah, between me and my friend. I don't always fly because my best friend also does drones, so sometimes I'll go out with his drone and he'll fly and I'll help with him and spot for him and just go out and hang out with my friend and fly his drone. So I'm not always flying, but yeah.
How many drone pilots do you know?
Personally, me and my friend. My best friend actually got me into drones because he built his own drone.
How much did your first drone cost?
My first drone was actually the white DJI Phantom 2 Vision Plus when they first came out about 5 years ago, and it was with all the batteries, because mind you don't just want one battery because they only last 20 minutes. So the first drone I got was probably about $2,000 with the case and the 4 batteries and all that.
Did it pay for it? How soon did it pay for itself?
It was kind of for a hobby and kind of for work because this was before they had all the rules involved. Like when I first got into drones, you were allowed to fly in national parks because they didn't have rules for that. And so, yeah.
How many drones do you have?
I have 2 right now.
2 drones.
Yeah.
And how often do you get a drone photo assignment? You're a young kid in school, but you're beginning to get this way to work your way through school. So how often?
Not super often, because I went over the other methods you can use. And given the chance, I like using drones. They're fantastic tools, for a filmmaker. But given the chance, I'll use one of the other options unless whatever the client would want or would necessitate drone use.
So how often do you get an assignment? Is this once a month?
No, it's not as often as that. I do a lot of catering work, and so that takes up a lot of time. And photography is more of a hobby I do to support my photography hobby. It's more of a job I do to support getting equipment and just enjoying doing it.
So if a yachtsman wanted you to film a day on the bay with his boat, give me a cost. What's a price range?
There's very big. It's
say a half a day. We want a couple hours.
I do it based on like a day rate of like if it is it 4 hours or is it longer than 4 hours?
4 hours.
And I should have thought of this before I came here, because I haven't been using drones a whole bunch recently.
You're a young entrepreneur. You get to invent your price.
Exactly, I do. I usually try to budget out about $150 an hour, and so you just figure it out from there.
So what's their range of command? You mentioned 1,000 feet.
It's about 1,000 feet, but that's like with no obstructions. Like I could go 1,000 feet out from here and be fine because it's over the water. There's no obstructions. But let's say I'm flying from where I'm sitting. There's walls in the way, and there's glass, and there's metal in the way. So I couldn't go 1,000 feet. If I'm outside, I can go 1,000 feet. So really, it just depends on what obstructions there are and the type of drone use.
Is that your constraint for elevation?
It's 400 feet max you're allowed to fly.
In terms of regulations?
Yes.
Okay.
You cannot fly. I know, right? Who's going to be checking? You cannot fly over 400 feet legally.
And we're not going to tell anybody, Anthony, but do you break that ever?
I broke it before it was a rule, too.
Good.
Because when I first bought drones, you got to understand that I started making the PowerPoint presentation 3 months ago, and a month ago I had to update some of the rules. They're updating these rules constantly. The federal government and the local people are updating rules constantly about drones. When I first started flying, I couldn't have made this presentation because they didn't have all these rules to talk about. right? 5 years ago, they didn't have all these rules because they just came on the market. You could just start buying drones and anyone could start flying. So they let you fly it wherever you wanted.
So what's the smallest drone you physically know about yourself? You've seen it.
Well, I
in
mean, they
web
make
or
ones that
wherever.
fit in the palm of your hand. You know,
Mhm.
they make even smaller ones than that. There's actually, you might have seen a really scary video about tiny drones that fit in the palm of your hand that can fly at you and explode. Yeah, and they're exceptionally tiny, and so they could fly in windows and other things like that and be automated to find the right person with facial recognition. So they make tiny drones, but they're a little scary.
At the Stag Cruise, we had a military drone expert, and he did talk about them literally the size of your hand.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
smaller even. So what's the zoom capacity on those drones that you have?
Well, my bigger one, the newer one, films in 4K resolution, which is actually modern phones nowadays do film in 4K. And they do take photos as well. So if you just want a high resolution image, you can just take photos. You can't change the camera that's on it. You're stuck with what you buy. You can buy bigger ones or make your own, like movies have interchangeable cameras. It's just a drone that fits the camera of any type on it. And you can stick any camera you want. So it allows room for like upward growth, I should say. Where if I get a better camera, I could stick a better camera on the drone. These, I'm kind of stuck with the cameras that are on it.
So have you lost any drones?
I've crashed a couple of times. The camera on that's actually a new camera than the one I bought it with because it got crashed into a tree and the camera bent and it wouldn't work. So, and I mean, you break propellers kind of often.
How often?
They come with extra ones, right? And so it's not like I have to go out and buy them all the time. They come with extra ones. I've probably broken a couple because even a little nick, you know, like I've probably broken 4 or 5 because even a little nick or like a bent, like if you try to land on concrete and it falls over and you bend or nick your propeller, you shouldn't really use it. And
So do you bend the propeller in 20 uses? How do you bend one every 20 uses?
Oh no, it just depends on where you're flying and how you're flying. Because if you're flying in a wooded area, be prepared to bring some extra propellers with you.
So now sailors like to sail in breeze in, San Francisco Bay.
Yes.
Sometimes we get 30 knots of breeze. Does it mean that you can't handle an assignment when it's blowing over 15? I heard you say.
I personally wouldn't put my drone at risk with that.
Above
if you
what?
want to fly your drone, you can fly it in whatever wind you want. You can fly it in the rain if you want. They have taken off in the rain and they can work. It's bad for the internals to fly in the rain, and I wouldn't do that to my equipment and put it in that risk and like risk hitting a boat and damaging someone. If you want to fly it with your boat, he has a question by the looks of it.
Well,
Just a comment on this topic.
Okay.
They're currently regularly flying DJI Cam 3s off of Volvo sailboats in over 20 knots of breeze. When the boat's doing over 20 knots, flying them around and recovering them manually.
Yeah, you can catch them.
Let me mention the question. One of the guests has said that drones are being used commercially for Volvo 70s, and they're going up to and beyond 30 knots in breeze
and
of 20,
he
30
specifically
knots.
mentioned DJI drones, and they can fly that fast. Like mine will go about 30 miles an hour, so you can. I just won't put my drone at risk and put that like liability danger on me.
The photographer
You know?
in that race is not paying for the drone.
Exactly.
The photographer is not paying for the drone. Good point. You have a question, sir?
Maybe just in addition to that, these drones, they come pretty locked down from the factory. If you are a little bit adventurous, you can go in and make some changes to the settings and make them fly a bit faster. It affects battery life, but you can make them go 40 miles an hour.
Yeah, you can also take them apart. He
Let me
says.
say, so what the guest said was that you can get drones that are more customizable than these preset bolt-mounted
When
ones.
you same ones, you can change them.
You can
Yeah,
hack
he's
them.
saying
Cool.
you can hack. Like I could take apart my drone and hack it to get better performance out of it, avoiding the warranty and all that. But if you're doing that, you should know what you're doing. So you just go into it, and you can give it better GPS. You can do all sorts of things to your drone if you are technically minded enough.
Ryan, can we hand this mic out so that we can pass it around?
Yeah, that'd be much easier.
Lance, would you like to be helpful moving the mic around? Thanks, buddy.
You got volunteers.
Yeah. Yes, sir. Question.
Comment and a question. My friend here was generous enough to let me try out his first drone, which was, I believe, a $79 version. As far as I know, that drone is still resting high in the branches of a redwood tree somewhere. That's because it did not have what I call the failsafe or the panic function, which is included in more expensive ones. the drone is controlled by a couple of sticks, and so if you panic, you let go of the sticks, and it freezes its position in space quite precisely. This other one didn't do it, went over my head, I panicked, sticks all over the place.
The drones like I have, as I mentioned, will stay in there. If you don't touch it, it'll stay wherever it is and hover there. And even like if you buy the brand new DJI drone, they have what they call object avoidance, where it'll scan what's around it, and it will automatically try to stay away. Personally, I wouldn't fly with that on because, one, I trust myself, and two, how does it know I'm not trying to get close to the object to film it? So you might want object avoidance or you might not want object avoidance. And the new ones will just stand still if you don't touch it.
Yeah, so having that feature of when you panic, you let
Yes.
go of the sticks, it's great.
Yeah.
So the question is drug delivery to inmates, controlling that.
When I was researching this, my friend was like, you should mention that they delivered drugs, and I think they even delivered a phone to an inmate with the drone. And I mean, it just shows what you can do with drones. You know, they're used for everything.
I have one follow-up question. Your friend whose drone you lost, is he buying lunch today?
But using a small drone like that is perfect. Like, you totally demonstrated why you should start with a small drone, just to get you a feel of what it's like to fly.
But it's so easy to panic on that because you let go.
Yeah, I mean, first place I practiced was in a very big field without obstructions, just to get an idea of what it felt like. And so it's great to start with a small drone just to practice.
Another question. Paul.
Well, in reading about what Amazon is planning to do, or what Amazon is proposing with, is there a gain control here? Reading about what Amazon is proposing to do with drone delivery, they're suggesting that the whole paradigm of air traffic control needs to be redesigned from the ground up. Instead of centralized, control centers with all the intelligence being concentrated in one place and blocked off airspace. What they propose is distributed intelligence, peer-to-peer negotiations between the autonomous drones, which makes orders of magnitude increases in air traffic density possible. Now, the drone world, as you describe it, is still not making that transition into peer-to-peer autonomous air traffic negotiation. Question one, do you think this is going to happen to drone regulations?
They'd have to change one of the fundamental rules where the pilot has to be able to see the drone at all times, which is really what's stopping Amazon from being able to do drone delivery, because the pilot in command of the aircraft has to see it at all times, which stops the autonomousness of it.
Right. And the more interesting question beyond that,
Yeah.
do you think there could be trickle up from this distributed intelligence autonomous air traffic control mode up into the world of commercial and recreational aviation, where we can increase the density of air traffic using that same system? I mean, think of what self-driving cars will be able to do with traffic density. And this is probably the most fundamental change necessary to have our, our cover of 1955 Popular Science flying car.
Exactly. It would take a long time to get there, just because it's taken them like 5-6 years from commercial drones just to get to this point, law-wise. And so it would take just lawmakers, because I'm sure they could figure out the mechanics way faster.
But in your view of the future, do you think this is where we're going?
I think there'll be easier ways to get there than on, like, say, a battery-powered helicopter flying everywhere. Because do you really want your neighbor to be taking off and landing all the time? It's loud, it's noisy. So unless everyone has it, unless you're living like where you can have a loud thing taken off, you might end up facing problems with like homeowners associations and all that. So there's a lot to figure out regarding laws, not just the person taking off in helicopter, because suddenly that's not an unmanned flight. You're trusting yourself to a flying machine that's controlled by a car. Controlled like a car, but it's suddenly flying with a bunch of other people.
Another question? Yes?
Yeah, what are the current laws with regard to paparazzi?
That is a really good question, and one I did not look up. If you can't fly on private property, like without their permission. Like, you can't take photos. I can't go stand on your front porch and take photos of your house and inside your house. So I would say it follows the same laws as that. Like, if I'm on the street, I'm allowed to take pictures because it's a public area. So if I'm flying a drone on the street, it's public and I'm allowed to take pictures. But if I'm flying the drone above your backyard, take a picture of your backyard, then it's suddenly, trespassing.
I imagine there would be local ordinances on that sort of thing. Anyhow, if you're a movie
Regarding
star or
specifically
something-
drones or just the cameras on drones is the thing.
Interesting.
There's a lot of ordinances on what you're allowed to can and cannot take photos of.
Yes, one more question. Steve?
Several years ago, I read an article when drones were still relatively new about, and there was talk about the use of tethered versus untethered drones, and that having a tethered drone solves a lot of the problems, solves the battery problem and things of that sort. But I don't hear much about that anymore. Does that not happen, or where'd that go?
I haven't heard anything about it at all because you don't want to be tethered really. It might work for some applications.
Yeah, they mentioned
You know?
like oil rigs, right? You want to sit up there and like have it up there for 3 days.
Yeah, and that's where it might come into handy just to use a tripod, like I mentioned, a tall tripod. So it would be, you mentioned oil rigs, which would actually might make sense because it might be hard to get it far enough away from you, run on battery power. That's actually worthwhile looking into. 'Cause I haven't heard anything about that because consumer-wise, I don't think they're trying to do that for consumers. So on the industrial scale, it might make sense to have a tether for the drone that'll be able to be up there for 5 days.
Question over here. Aha, well then, it's time for us to thank everyone for joining the Wednesday Yachting Luncheon at St. Francis Yacht Club. Thank you very much to Sailing Illustrated for helping us put this together. And Grant, are you queued up here? Because the luncheon is adjourned. Thank you. Good on you, mate.
If anyone does want to come look at the drones up close, feel free to come over and say hi.
Yeah, no problem. Here, let me put up a video of the drones doing a regatta. You needed that. You needed the presentation. It's got the slide video. There's a very cool one that someone did. Oh, there you go. Right. Yeah, you need to open with that. They're moderately, they're pretty quiet because they're electric, but you hear the whirring of the blades. Oh yeah. You can hear them a couple hundred feet away if you're listening. If you're not listening, they're pretty quiet. Yeah. It also depends how big it is. Yeah, well, yeah.